In 1979, you were on a sabbatical leave here in Florida, studying wasps, the insect, not the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. But you also learned ways that Florida is different from Great Britain. How about reading about that experience?
I did a sabbatical leave at the University of Florida in Gainesville with my colleague, Dr. Jane Brockman, who had just left Oxford, where we'd been working together. We'd been working together with a graduate student of mine, Alan Graffan, who has since become what I would call a mentor of mine. He's a brilliant mathematical biologist, and I've learned far more from him, though he was my student, than he ever learned from me. Jane and I conducted a graduate seminar in evolution and behavior at Gainesville, in which we were joined by 2 other professors. My chief memory of these weekly gatherings was the way in which they became increasingly dominated by the intellectual power of Alan Graffan. On the face of it, he was just a graduate student among many, and one of the youngest. But it was remarkable how we all, students and professors alike, fell into the habit of turning to Alan to resolve our difficulties and tell us, in his sharp Scottish tones, how to think clearly about them and reach the correct conclusion. My Florida sabbatical wasn't all wasps and work. Jane, Alan, and I were joined by Donna Gillis, a friend of Jane's from the zoology department, and the 4 of us set off to discover more of Florida. We went on drives to Disney World. Alan insisted on taking all the most hair-raising rides. And Sea World. Alan was the first to volunteer to be pushed into the pool by a performing seal. We went to the university's Seahorse Key, marine biology research station on the Gulf of Mexico coast, where we self-catered and slept in dormitory bunks. We saw limulus, horseshoe crabs, although they aren't crabs at all, but distant relatives of spiders. Jane later did research on these living fossils. We saw thousands of ghost crabs, they really are crabs, scuttling into their burrows as we approached, leaving their easily traced footprints. Most memorable was the phosphorescence in the sea, caused by the disturbance of microscopic organisms in the plankton. We played ducks and drakes, skimming flat stones over the water and watching the glowing ripples as the stones struck the surface. Donna danced on the night beach, her toes in the wet sand, inscribing patterns of glowing and then fading phosphorescent blue, charmingly singing of herself in the 3rd person. She's dancing. On another beach, Alan and I swam naked, which alarmed Jane and Donna, because to Alan's and my surprise, apparently it was and is illegal, even at night. Now that I think about it, an incident many years later gives me reason to believe the illegality really is taken seriously in the United States. The anthropologist Helen Fisher and I were skinny dipping in Lake Michigan one warm summer night after a hot day of conference speeches at Northwestern University. A police car drew up on the road 100 yards away. It was dark, so I don't know how they had spotted us, but they trained a searchlight on us and bellowed through a bullhorn, "You're subject to arrest! You're subject to arrest! You're subject to arrest!" Panic-stricken, without waiting to get dry, Helen and I tugged our clothes on as we ran. No such incident marred Alan's and my rather swift and brief dip in the moonlit Florida waves. I suspect with hindsight that we did it for reasons of bravado more than enjoyment. Jane now tells me she discourages her students from swimming off that particular beach because one often sees sharks there. That reminds me, if I may, of a story in volume 1 of An Appetite for Wonder, I think it is. There's a lake in Northern Ireland where our family go to stay sometimes, and the children are in the habit of swimming naked there. And one time, somebody shouted, "There's a pike!" And a pike is a large predatory fish. I don't know whether you have them here. And then all the boys, but not the girls, went hurtling in.
And fortunately for you, Richard, in 1979, there was no YouTube to have filmed that. Now, you've met and written about so many famous and accomplished people like Neil Armstrong, Bill Gates, David Attenborough, Richard Leakey, John Cleese, James Watson, Francis Crick, Karl Popper, and many more. The only one in your book who stood you up was the Dalai Lama.
Yes.
Who else would you like to meet, and why did the Dalai Lama stand you up?
Well, this was a television program called Sex, Death, and the Meaning of Life. And it was for Channel 4, and the producer wanted me to go and interview the Dalai Lama. And so she phoned up and said, would I go to India to interview the Dalai Lama? And I said, he won't see me, don't you? There's not a chance. Of course he won't see me. But I tell you what, if you can get him, if you can persuade him, then I'll do it. Ha, ha, ha. I mean, that was my way of saying no, because I knew he wouldn't agree. So she said, right, and she went off. And then about 3 weeks later, the telephone rang, and she said in great excitement, he's agreed, he's agreed, he's agreed. We're going to India, we're going to India. The Dalai Lama's agreed, we're going to interview the Dalai Lama. So I said, oh, well, all right. I promised, so I guess I'll have to go. And we went to India, and as I thought, he was much too busy to see me. And so we interviewed his, I don't know, chief lieutenant or lieutenant, sorry. And we had a good time in India. We did all sorts of fascinating things and got some very good footage, but that was the time he stood me up, yes.
Are there other people that you would like to meet that you haven't yet met?
I like to meet all sorts of people. I mean, I'd like to meet...
Besides the people here, of course.
Yes, of course. I'd like to meet President Obama, who I believe is the first atheist president of the United States.
I disagree with you, actually. I don't think President Obama is the first atheist. I think we've had several, like Jack Kennedy and many other bright presidents. But I'm hoping to someday have an out of the closet, an openly secular president in this country.